film was shot in 1969 by Brian Repstat. Brian was the radio supervising technician. Brian lived at Repstat with the 3 other workers during the year: Rod Mackenzie, the senior plumber, Terry Kelly, senior electrician, and Rod Nicholson, the carpenter who was in charge of the operations. This is working on one of the floors of the sleeping dongas by the look of the position. They had all the floors put down there by 1968, and they're assembling the walls and roof and the partitions inside the buildings. The wall panels were secured to the floor with long bolts up through the floor. A divider put through down the middle that they're putting up now to hold the roof in the centre, because the roofing panels were tapered to let the snow and the water run off in the summertime. These long bolts went up through the floor into the bottoms of the wall panels. This is the divider being hoisted up into then the roofing panels were lifted up onto the roof of the builder's hoist. You can see the taper on the roof section there. So looking from up on the transmitter site, Brian's got a wheelbarrow of concrete that he's pouring into the foundations of the pivot for the radio mast to be erected. Doug Twiggs mixing up more concrete. They needed to pour these special foundations so that the A-frame could be used to tilt up and pull the mast upright. The mast was supported by 3 big guy anchors that were buried in a big hole into 3 points around from the mast. They were very heavy sheets of steel with these pivoting points that came out to have the guy shackles up above the ground level. These plates were dropped into a big hole that had been blasted into the loose rock there, and then the rocks were backfilled into the hole to supply a big heavy weight to stop the mast from falling over. These sections come up through the backfill to anchor the guys onto, and they're using the track excavator to backfill the hole over the top of these metal plates. So 3 of these for each of the directions of the mast. And they held a number of guys. They're putting a rock pin in here to try and make a support for the pulley snatch block there, so to change directions as they're lifting up. But I don't think this rock was heavy enough, because they used a tractor later on. You can see the pivots here for this A-frame. They used a D4 winch to pull the A-frame over to make the mast come upright. Roger Williams is directing operations as they hoist the mast upright till they get it vertical, and they guy it all down and dismantle the rest of the works and use it to raise the 2 other masts that were a bit further away for the receivers. Looking back down towards the building, the train light section, as the corrugated iron tank sections are being fixed onto the scaffolding pipes that formed the tunnel between all the buildings. And along the roof line after a blizzard had left some snow on it. The transmitter had some remote control cables that went across the valley. That they were tied onto a catenary was a wire spinner that they were hauling across, but the strong winds were too much for it and never survived. These are 3 stub masts that go out to support the catenary on the top of the 140-foot mast that holds up the log periodic aerials that we used at that stage. This is joining the yacht mast sections together. They were 22-foot yacht mast sections, and this bolt that goes through to hold the joining section together was believed to be responsible for why they broke and fell down in a big blizzard in 1969. The cable from the top of the A-frame goes down through the snatch block and off to the winch of the D4, which is located some distance away. They've got a radio communication to the tractor driver to tell them when to stop when it gets to the right place. You see the traxcavator there being used as the winch point for the change of direction, so that it was heavier than the rock that they were drilling a hole in before. All that number of wires go to the different levels of the joining pieces on the 140-foot tall mast. It's the pivot at the bottom of the mast. This is the distribution panel inside the radio office there, where all the telephone lines were connected up to, went to all the rooms in all the buildings along the building line and across to the workshops on the other side of the road and up to the transmitter hut. There was a telephone line run around the coast to Wilkes so that they could use it to talk to each other there, and another pair of wires run for the teleprinter so the Met Bureau could send their recordings back to the radio system over there. The telephone lines caused a bit of problem when they were having a blizzard. The snow blowing over the telephone lines made a lot of drift static. The high voltages came into the equipment in the exchange here and caused the equipment to seize up. So somebody's looking for the burnt tracks on the printed board where the high voltage had caused the damage. But we were able to solve that the next year with some bleed resistors to bleed the high voltage off the telephone lines. guy and did all the installation of this, so he's recording for posterity his work. Raising one of the other masts there up on the further inland there where the receiving site was. They had two other masts over there to give a diversity reception so that the signal wasn't always fading in the one place, so they could maintain continuous reception. And Roger Williams directing operations for raising the mast there. They need quite a number of people to man all the guys and tie them off when it reached the right place. The mast was made up of 6 22-foot sections of aluminium yacht mast and another 8 foot on the top of it, which made it about 140 foot tall. And then the catenaries to the 3 stub masts came down from the top of the mast. That's the receiver building over there in the distance there. So the other mast hasn't been put up yet by the look of it. Hunting party going over to the penguin rookeries to try and catch some penguins to put tags on their flippers. Have to walk across the valley, then head off across the back of these rocks there to Shirley Island, where there's a very, very big penguin rookery. At each of the rookeries there was usually quite a few skua nests who scavenged on the eggs and the dead chicks there, and they didn't like people coming near their nests as if they had any chicks there. They tended to dive bomb you like the magpies did, to try and scare you away from their nests. Someone doing a head count of all the birds that are there, all their chicks. thousands of penguins that nest on that rookery. Back in the kitchen, the big mixer's stirring up some bread dough for Rod Mackenzie, the senior plumber, to make some bread. After spending the year at Repstat, Rod worked for the Antarctic division for a number of years, did a few trips down south, and went into business for himself at Geelong, and then became elected to a member of the Victorian Parliament there, and became the President of the Upper House for a number of years in the Victorian Parliament. A big electric oven that did all the baking. Just as you expect, when you're filming it, you burnt it. It was one of the old buildings that had been over at Wilkes that they put on a sledge and brought it over to Repstat there to be used as a field store in the valley near the transmitter hut. When they got it over there, it had to be pegged down, guyed down to stop it blowing away. Using the track excavator to bring a load of fuel over to Repstat from Wilkes. The old international truck that they weren't able to use very much because they damaged the transmission in it somewhere and needed replacing. The Thala Dan eventually arrived after it was brought through the pack ice by the south winds, and we only had 4 days to do the changeover. The Americans used their landing craft to bring some of the fuel drums ashore there, and their crew unloaded that and put them into cargo nets that were flown by the helicopter up to the fuel dump, which was on the other side of the station and near the fuel store. Part of the unloading was a new radar that was being installed at Casey. They was loaded onto the barge and then hauled off the barge by the D4. It was on a sledge arrangement, so they were able to tow it over to where they needed to install it, and then dismantle all the packing crate from around it. Once they got it off the barge, it had to be towed up the road a bit to be able to take it over to where it had to be installed. On the 19th of February, they had a handover ceremony. That's Neil Brightwell, who was the OIC of Wilkes, handing over to Roy Spratt, who was the voyage leader for this 1969 crew, along with the ship's commander. They all made speeches from up on the landing outside the mess. That's all the crowd waiting for all them in. There's a party inside of the feed there. It's all gathered on the road outside below the landing. That's the ship's commander saying his piece. It's the most of the Wilkes party and the new Casey crew and a lot of the ship's crew that were standing around in the ceremony there. And it was the turn of the 1969 OIC, Ted Howells, to say his piece. After the speeches, everybody trooped inside for a meal inside there. This is one of the radio operators, Mike Riley, bringing a tray up. He's followed by our doctor, Bob Lippittlaw, and the IPSO man. Because of the 4-day changeover, the radio section wasn't working, and the 4 radio operators, a technician and an engineer to look after the diesel plant was sent over to live at Wilkes for the next 7 weeks until all the radio system was up and operating. This was a temporary sign that they put up there after the place was named Casey at the handover ceremony there on the roadway there. And on the 19th of February, the ship left to take the Wilkes and Repstat Party back to Australia. This is some of the footage shot on the Thala Down as they had their trip back to Australia.